All right, everyone, we are just about ready to get started. Lisa, Rovi, and Nelson, why don't you go ahead and turn your cameras on? Although if you want to stay muted, you are welcome to do that. I want to welcome everyone to this morning's webinar, celebrating the publication of our edited collection, The Business of Innovating Online. I'm Katie Linder, the Director of Research here for Oregon State University Ecampus, and I'm really thrilled that you can all join us today to talk about innovative financial models in online education. Going to do a couple quick housekeeping things. I'm assuming that everyone can hear and see us because you're answering my prompts in the chat, so that's a good sign. I also want to thank our co-sponsors for this webinar series. You can see them listed down there at the bottom of the slide. We had support from ELI, WCET, OLC, QM, and UPCEA in letting folks know that this webinar was happening, and several of them also contributed to the volume as well. If you saw that there was a book raffle associated with this webinar, that raffle has happened and the books have been sent out. And if you did not receive one, this would have been way back in September, you can still use the code BIO20 for a 20% off discount on the book at the Stylus website. You may have noticed that we are live captioning today's event, and we are also recording today's event, and we will be sharing this recording later on, and you are welcome to check out the replay and share it with colleagues. So with today's topic on innovative financial models, I'm really excited to introduce our three panelists. We have Lisa Templeton, who's the Associate Provost for Ecampus at Oregon State University. We have Nelson Baker, who's joining us from the Georgia Institute of Technology, and Rovi Brannon from the University of Washington. And as we get kicked off, I also want to let you know that we have a Q&A feature in our Zoom webinar platform that is going to be the most convenient way for you to ask questions of our panelists today. And we definitely expect some questions from the audience. So please feel free to ask a question in that Q&A feature. It helps me to facilitate and manage those questions a little bit easier. And I'm also putting up here our contact information for today's speakers. We don't always get to everyone's questions, so if you need to follow up with anyone in particular, we welcome you doing that. Okay, so let's go ahead and kick off today's session. I would love for each of our panelists to share just a little bit about the context of your current roles and who you're serving at your institutions, and maybe even a little bit about your current financial model, since that is the topic for today's session. So Nelson, do you want to go ahead and unmute and kick us off?
I'll be happy to, Katie, and welcome to everybody who is listening in. This certainly is a dynamic conversation from my perspective as we constantly learn from each other in this space. So Nelson Baker, Dean of Professional Education. I have a faculty appointment in civil and environmental engineering here as professor. The individuals that we serve tend to range from their mid to late teens all the way into their 80s. So I had the great opportunity to interview a person who was 16 working on her master's degree this past summer, and a gentleman the same week, 83, working on same master's degree in analytics. And I think that's talking about how our market space is changing. When I say our, I mean us as an industry, not just Georgia Tech, about the individuals that we're serving, trying to get new knowledge in their hands as quickly as possible. The financial models that we have, one of my challenges at this institution is I have 38 different financial models, and that's too many. And how do we find ways to consolidate those into more meaningful ways, but also looking at the internal and external stakeholders, which will be, I think, a question that will come up later in this session. So I think I'll mute myself now and pass the baton.
Thanks so much, Nelson. Lisa, do you want to go next and introduce yourself?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Good morning, everyone. I'm Lisa Templeton. I'm the Associate Provost for Oregon State University's Ecampus. At Oregon State, Ecampus is the central online education unit, and we work with everyone across campus. Everyone works through us in a true partnership. So in Ecampus, we have a variety of units. We have a course development and training unit. We have a marketing and enrollment service unit, a student success team, an Ecampus research unit, an open education resources unit, again, that's serving across campus, not just online, and a brand new corporate education unit. And Oregon State University is the land-grant institution for the state of Oregon. So online education, providing access really fits in well with our mission. And that's really why we started eCampus, to provide access to learners around the state of Oregon. And we do. We have learners in every corner of the state. But because it's online, we have grown substantially, and we do serve learners in all 50 states and about 50 countries right now, which is mind-boggling to us here how much we've grown. Our audience is probably very similar to everybody else's. We are serving working adults, place-bound individuals in rural areas. We have a lot of stay-at-home parents. Like Nelson, the age range is huge. And we also have a growing population of military students. But most of our students are what we call stopouts. They started their education at one point, sometimes here at Oregon State, sometimes at another university or community college, and they're at the point in their life where they want to finish their degree, and online education is the solution for them. So that's really what our focus is. We created a revenue share model, which I'll probably be explaining and talking about throughout this webinar early on, and I really attribute the revenue model has really helped us be successful. If we didn't have a revenue share model, the financial model that we did, I don't think we would be where we are today. So I'm excited to talk about it, share it, and learn about everybody else's as well.
Great. Thanks so much, Lisa. And Rovi, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone, and happy to join you. Rovi Brannon. I'm Vice Provost at the University of Washington's Continuum College, and we have a big tent at Continuum College. We have everything from summer youth programs with 8-year-olds and an Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at the other bookend with at least 1 or 2 98-year-olds. So we say we serve 8 to 98 in our portfolio. It includes not just camps, but also includes a summer session for the university, as well as most of our online degrees run through us at the University of Washington. As well as any degrees that self-sustain, meaning they don't get state support. And so we manage about 111 total degree programs, of which about 20 are online. We use a similar financial model for both the face-to-face programs that we manage and the online programs that we manage. It's detailed in the book. It's a fixed fee model, which might be a little bit different than some of the percentage revenue share models. I'd be happy to chat a bit more about that as we get into the conversation today, but it really has enabled growth of programs at every size and stature. And I think that's one advantage of a fixed fee model over a percentage model, is that we can run programs that are very small and they can still recover their costs as long as they can afford to pay the fee structure. And it also scales very well to run larger programs. It does have some drawbacks. We can talk about that a little bit later, but it's enabled us to grow over the last 15 or 20 years into a sizable portfolio of self-sustaining degrees. And again, about 18 to 20% of those are fully online programs for us. And we look forward to the growth and look forward to the conversation this morning.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rovi. So for our audience, the chapter in the book on innovative financial models does detail definitions of some of the models that have been mentioned today. So if you want kind of a rundown of what do we mean by fixed fee models or revenue share models, that's one place to look. But we are going to get into, I think, some of that as we talk about examples. I'm hoping that we can start with just some of the most important elements of financial models that online learning organizations should consider. So let's break it down just a little bit. And I'm wondering if one of you wants to kick us off. Does somebody want to start? Rovi, can I call on you?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here. I think we're all frozen. I think everybody's about to push the button at the same time here, so we don't want to step on each other's toes. Well, I think anytime you think about a financial model, you know, there are several big components. First of all, obviously, the bottom line, right? So you have to look at whether programs are sustaining. And for us as a public institution, it isn't necessarily about generating significant net profits or net revenues, but it is about making sure programs can self-sustain. And so when you look at a financial model, there are different ways to bring programs to a level of self-sustaining. Now, for many of us, we do hope that there's some additional revenue at the end of the day for these programs, and how that revenue gets distributed is another critical part of what these models encompass. I always like to say one of the things that is often not talked about up front, but I think is absolutely essential when you talk about a financial model, is who owns the risk. in program development, and who owns the financial risk, both up front in terms of the amount of money that gets put in to get started, but also who owns the risk down the road should a program move to a point where it does need to sunset. And though that doesn't happen all that often for many of us, I think understanding and taking into account the variables of risk are absolutely critical. So does that risk sit at the center of your institution? Is it held by the department that's running the program? Is it held by the unit that is facilitating, whether it's an online unit at one of our units or another component such as a continuing education unit? And so I think you have to look at all of those components, where the revenues flow, how you sustain the expenses for running a program, how you manage the risk, where any excess revenue goes when that is generated, and how that gets distributed. And so, those are some of the I think the basic components, the big shell that I would put around any financial model. I'm sure my colleagues, though, have a couple of areas that they can chime in and remind me where we have some other places too.
Thanks for kicking us off, Rovi. Nelson, you want to add anything?
Yeah, so I would certainly echo what Rovi has just mentioned, and I'll add a couple of others as he suggested. And I'd say it's an internal versus external view. So externally, certainly making sure that students can afford your program, find ways in which financial aid, loans, whatever means possible to be able to afford your program. And that's certainly something that Georgia Tech has taken a lead role in, trying to create degrees that are more affordable, more accessible, but not diminish quality, and in fact increase the quality. But then internally, you have aspects also, and the first one there that I always remind ourselves about, as well as our faculty colleagues, is that tuition does not equal cost. And I think that's one of the big parameters that many people conflate, is that the tuition is equal to the cost, and it's not. Most institutions have an in-state or out-of-state or some type of tuition structure. Sometimes they don't even get to set that, it's set by others. But not all degree programs have the same costs. Faculty salaries are different, student sizes are different, so the cost structures are all different. And looking at what's a fixed cost, so a faculty member in the classroom, whether there's one student or a million students, is the same faculty cost. Then there's also variable costs that go along with that. And then understanding that tuition does not equal cost, and understanding what's your fixed versus variable costs, I think are two of the important internal considerations.
Wonderful. Thanks, Nelson. Lisa, you want to add anything here?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. For Ecampus, when we started online education at this university, and we approached faculty and departments, and we had determined that we were going to build everything ourselves, that all online courses through Oregon State were going to be done with Oregon State faculty. So we would knock on doors, we would do a dog and pony show trying to engage faculty to take the time to build online courses with us and degree programs. And the answer was generally, sorry, we're too busy. We know this sounds good, we'll reach more students, it's part of our land grant mission, but too busy, can't do it. So that's when we really had to implement this revenue share model that we use. And I hate to say it, but the money did bring them in at first. It really was motivational. So we'd have one department who would work with us, and money was, there was a correlation. Our model, for those of you who didn't read the chapter, we provide about 80% of the tuition back to the academic unit that is teaching the course and developing the course with us. So it's significant. And we made it significant on purpose because we wanted to grow. We wanted to incentivize the faculty and the departments who are working with us. So we would have one department who was working with us, and the model does a very nice job about ensuring that all the costs are covered, and I can explain that later. And then, as my colleagues have said, then there's some extra. So these extra dollars were unrestricted funds to departments. So some departments were having funds to travel to conferences, to pay for GTAs, and then there could be a department down the hall who doesn't have any of this. And they were seeing that the other departments were gaining by teaching online financially. And it really was an important part of our growth. Now, I think people are more engaged in how important it is to reach our learners. But initially, the revenue share model was critical to getting us started, to getting us going, to launching our first few programs. So I think that's one really important key. And then the second piece is we have one model. So we're different than you, Nelson. And I think that was critical because when we started, we were the wild, wild west. You know, it was let's make a deal. If you're going to develop a program, we'll give you this. We'll give this person this. Well, you know, it was so inconsistent. So at the university, we created one revenue share model for any degree program, any college, any department that's working with us, everyone gets the same percentage back. We vary on what we give them to work with us to develop the courses because some courses are much heavier lift than others. But as far as the revenue share model, one model across campus, and I really think that helps keep things equitable.
Okay, I want to remind our audience that you can ask questions if you have follow-up questions based on what our panelists are saying or other questions you want to make sure that we get to about financial models. You can use that Q&A feature that is in your Zoom window. So feel free to click on that and submit any questions you might have. I'd love to shift into some of the challenges of creating financial models that are kind of specific to an online learning organization. And I'm wondering if, Lisa, do you want to start with this one?
Sure, be happy to. I think the biggest challenge in creating the financial model was making it work for all the partners, all the participants. So we're not doing this just ourselves. We're a unit within the university and there's a lot of partners. And so we at Ecampus, we take a lot of the risk because we are responsible for all the course development. So all the instructional design, multimedia, we do a lot of student support services, success coaching. We do the marketing for the programs. We're training faculty. So our costs are pretty high in building. And so we need to be able to recoup our costs. The departments are providing the faculty member who builds the course with us and then is also teaching the course. So they've got expenses. And then Central is our partner. So we partner the libraries providing, you know, library services for our students. The registrar is working with our students. Financial aid, Central Financial Aid is supporting our students. So we have all these different entities that are working together. So we needed a model that worked for everyone. And that was complicated and challenging. And our model isn't perfect, but I think it works quite well. It evolves and has evolved over the years as we've changed. But I think for us, the biggest portion, the biggest incentive needed to go to the colleges because the colleges own the curriculum, they own the courses. So we can't do anything as a university without the college partner. And that's why in our model, 80% of the tuition revenue goes back to the academic college to make that a really large incentive to work with us. We know how busy faculty are, and it takes a lot of time to develop a high quality online course. We want ours to be high quality. So they're required to go through a training program. They're required to work with our instructional designer and our multimedia teams. There's a lot of requirements on the faculty who work with us. So there's a lot of reward back to the college for letting them work with us. So again, I think just the challenge is to make sure that it's going to work for everyone on campus, and because we're all working together on this endeavor.
Lisa, we have a quick follow-up question for you about that 80%. Somebody's wondering if there is an equivalent distribution back to the colleges for traditional face-to-face delivery, or just how that compares. Can you respond to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. When we started Ecampus, there wasn't. So the deans and the department heads loved this model because there was a definite direct correlation, right? More student credit hours, the more revenue was coming. So initially, no, there were definitely two models on campus. The model that was for campus, and then this Ecampus model. The Ecampus model had that more direct correlation. Since then, a couple of years ago, the university has switched over to a new RCM model. So it is more similar, but it's not the same.
Okay, and we have another quick question. A lot of people are very interested in this 80%. So let me just kind of make sure while we're here. So somebody asked, does the 80% go back to the individual departments within the college or to the college overall?
That's a great question. We send all of our revenue to the college, and all of our deans take their tax first. And then they generally, then after they take that percentage tax, and each dean has their own number of what they take, the rest generally goes to the academic unit that is offering the program or the courses. So we don't dictate where the money goes. That's not our purview. We send the money over to the college. So if the college isn't giving it to the academic unit, that's their purview. We can't say anything about it, but I can tell you the majority do. The majority of our partners, again, the dean's office is taking a piece, but the majority goes back to the academic unit. And the way the model is set up, that revenue should cover the cost of instruction plus. The department can look at, okay, what is Professor X making? You know, she is making this much. If we know what 80% of the student credit hour is, so you know, okay, we need 20 students in this course to cover her salary for this course. Anything above 20 is extra. They can say, okay, we only have 10, and that's not enough to make the course go to cover the cost of Professor X, and they have the prerogative to cancel the course if they want to. So there's a lot of control that the department has, but the money all funnels through the college. It's varied over the years, but that's where we are now.
Okay, so Lisa, we have one more question for you,
Okay.
and then I promise Rovi and Nelson will get to your challenges as well. So there's a couple questions related to how Ecampus is funded if 80% is going to the colleges. So one person asked, how do we ensure units sustainability? One person has kind of assumed the 20% that's left goes to Ecampus, so we should clarify that. So can you talk a little bit about how Ecampus is then funded? Because several questions have come in about that and how that's working.
Sure. Our model has evolved. I would say we've had 4 to 5 different models over the 20 years I've been here. So the first model that we had was an 80-20 split, where 80% of the tuition went to the college and 20% went to Ecampus. And that was enough for us to cover our costs. There was no problem. Let me even step back. We kicked off Ecampus with a large multi-million-dollar grant, a FIPSI grant. So we had those resources to use to incent faculty. So that was our original funding. And then we went to the 80-20 model. After a couple of years we were growing at a nice rate, the university realized, wait a minute, there's nothing in it for us. If the colleges are getting 80 and Ecampus is getting 20, what about us? So then it moved to an 80-10-10 model. And then we started actually charging a distance ed fee. And so the model changed again, and it became 80-10-10, plus we started charging a distance ed fee, which I think at the time was a $65 per credit hour distance ed fee. That's changed over the years. It's been anywhere between 65 and 85. And then the model evolved again, and the university started taking the 20. So the colleges got 80, the university got 20, and Ecampus got the distance ed fee. And that worked really well, because if you add up $75 or $85 times credit hours, and our credit hours, I said, was growing. We were growing at about 15% every year for 10 years. That was significant resources. It was enough for us to grow. We now have a staff of about 90 people. It worked well. 2 years ago, the university changed the model, and they embedded the distance ed fee into the student tuition for Ecampus. And so now they just give us, we're just now a line item or a budgeted item. So there's no direct correlation for the first time about how we grow and how much money we get, but it's still working. The budget office knows we're a priority. The university knows this is the growth unit of the university. So I absolutely can't complain about the funding we're getting. I mean, obviously everyone could use more funding, but it is significant, and it is enough for us to continue to grow. And I think the colleges, that model has never changed. It's always been 80%, and I will fight for that model, because that's the magic number. If we drop it a lot lower, they're going to say it takes up too much time. There's other things I could be doing, research I could be doing, scholarship. So to get them to engage in online, it had to be, and still has to be, a significant portion of the tuition going to them. Sorry, that was a long answer.
That was helpful. And it also got to another question about kind of the evolution of how the model has changed over time. So thank you. That was really helpful, Lisa. Okay, Rovi, why don't you talk about some of the challenges that you see about creating financial models in online learning organizations?
Sure. It is, I think, I'll mirror what Lisa said. I think we have a single model as well. And it's a very old model. It's been around for a long time, because it started with face-to-face, and we've evolved it over time into online with some additional fee structures. Again, fixed fee, a certain amount per course that's charged on top of our existing financial model. For mature programs, our model has a declining obligation at the beginning, so it's more expensive, and then it gets less expensive over time. For mature programs in our model, we are sending back over 92% back to the departments to cover their expenses and also for revenue generation. All net revenue goes back to the department. So I only recover my actual expenses with my model. And so there's some advantages there. More money goes back to the department. That's part of the reason our portfolio is so large. The disadvantage is it leaves us a little bit cash strapped sometimes to reinvest in some of what we need to invest in on our side of the fence. And I think when you're at a very large institution, University of Washington, $7.9 billion institution, lots of different kinds of schools and colleges structured in different ways. One challenge of having a single model, which I think the benefits in many ways can outweigh the challenges, but we are now beginning to sense some real distinct changes in the field of online with different flavors of online. So not everything's going to fit the same online mold that a single model is going to focus on. We have some departments increasingly interested in, and I'll let Nelson talk about what does a degree model look like if it's running at scale? What does a degree model look like for a very small niche program that might have very expensive needs? What does a program look like where we might want to spend far more in marketing than our current model can afford? And so the disadvantage of having a single model is that it can be difficult to accommodate needs that are legitimate needs for a wide variety of audiences on a very large campus with some highly different and disparate kinds of models of operating on our own campuses. I think, and Lisa already mentioned this, so that's a big picture problem, I think, for all of us. I think Nelson's at the other extreme, as he said, 38 models. I don't want 38 models, but sometimes I feel the need to have more than one. I might need 2 or 3 so that I can say, here's a model for sort of our standard services, standard marketing package. If you want me to compete with an outside provider who's going to spend substantially more than we do, and maybe the market demands that for a particular degree, we are looking at a new kind of second model now that can support those additional kinds of programs that want to move in that direction. So not 38 models, but we might have 2 or even 3 over the next 3 to 5 years as the online landscape begins to differentiate, move in different directions, and have very different kinds of financial needs for different programs. One of the things that we do with our model is each program stands on its own bottom. And so we do not cross-subsidize expenses across degree programs. And so sometimes when you're at a percentage of revenue model, larger programs are unwittingly subsidizing the cost of running much smaller programs. And we just have chosen a philosophy that says each program pays its own costs, and we don't have that kind of internal subsidy going on for our self-sustaining degree programs at the University of Washington. So that's a big picture frame. Let me just take it down very narrowly to one issue that I think all these models are challenged with in online. And I'll take this from my background, which is instructional design. And I've built over 300 courses and programs as a designer before moving into administration. And one of the most dreaded questions you can be asked about a program is, how much is a great online course cost? And it's sort of like standing with an architect in front of a piece of land, and you say, how much would a great house cost on this piece of land? And the architect says, $500 million. Well, no, I only have $250,000. Great, I can build you a great house for $250,000 as well. I've built courses with almost essentially zero budget as an instructional designer. I've also worked in corporate and military settings where I've had $3 to $5 million to build a course that might be 30 hours of instruction if it's a simulation. And you can build great courses all along that paradigm. But when you start to look at the kinds of expenses, and I talked about this with marketing, it's a little easier to see if a program needs far more marketing than you typically spend. But if a program needs far more in instructional design than you typically spend, those are areas where you have to sort of set those parameters and really understand that this enables a lot of growth, but you can also have some constraints in there as well. So those are, sort of at a big level. The big challenge of a single model is that it does make it feel like a one-size-fits-all sometimes to your clients on campus or customers or partners. And on the other hand, you do have needs that can be acute in certain kinds of programs that if you want each program to be sustaining in and of itself, you have to have some variability in the way that you approach that. So those are some of our challenges, I think, in the way that our model has played itself out here at UW. We have evolved too, and we expect to continue to evolve as we move forward.
Awesome, thanks, Rovi. We have a ton of questions coming in, but I'm going to kick it over to Nelson to talk about challenges, and then we'll start picking up some of the Q&A from audiences.
So I'd echo what Lisa and Rovi have both said, and I'm talking from now the other spectrum. I said I had 38 different models, but I also want to clarify that that includes my non-credit models, not just degree models. And that's where some of the variation comes in also. But before we get too far afield on the percentages that go back to various units, I think there's a couple of important aspects to make here. One is certainly financial incentives back to the academic colleagues on our various universities does matter. But the percentages also depends on what's in that cost structure. So for some of our models, the actual cost of the faculty member is in the cost structure, and the percentages that we're talking about is only the residuals that are left over. And so one of the important tenets that we have here is transparency. I don't want to be in a situation where somebody else says, well, how come you get X percent and they get Y percent, and those kinds of arguments, because it's really about scope of work and what's in the budget. And if we all agree upon those kinds of things, then we all win. And then we talk about what happens and where are we trying to invest. The second thing that I would mention at the macro level on all these things are startup costs. Before you begin a program, there are 0 students. So where are the funds coming from? And it's somewhat tied to Rovi's comment about risk. Who's taking the risk that actually anybody will show up, and you've sunk costs into creating a program that you don't have any revenue to support. On the back end of that is the program matures. Will those students continue to come to the program? And if not, then what happens? And then the last thing I just say about all of this is that I'm constantly challenged also that as we're putting together across these 3 institutions and many more that are on this webinar, great pedagogical frameworks of how do we help faculty design really wonderful learning environments. Faculty are wanting to use those in a residential classroom, not just in the online classroom. And many of us have assets that have been contracted to only be online. And that's causing me great concern because I see those assets being used residentially. I may have a third-party contract for some particular software or technology or other kind of endeavor that residential tuition does not cover. And I've got to find ways in which we can take the great pedagogy that's being developed in these online programs and let it serve all students, residential or online. And that's where I see my financial models changing the most, is how do I allow it to help all students, all learners. And I think if we all rolled our sleeves up and said that's our #1 objective, is to help all people learn, whether they're online or residentially, be self-sufficient in how we make that happen, then the right thing will happen.
Okay, so let's shift over to some of these questions that we're getting from the audience. They're all really great. We have one that is kind of focused on hybrid, so I'm not sure if somebody feels like they can answer that. Jeff asks, should models account for the differences in costs associated with the development of hybridizing in-seat courses in a traditional program versus development of fully online programs? I'm wondering if someone feels they can speak to that.
So this is Nelson, and certainly my answer is yes. That's one of my models. As we have several programs that are hybrid where there's a residential stay as well as an online stay, and so that model looks different because the cost structure is different with that residential component versus the online component. It's where I'm challenged in trying to find a one-size-fits-all. I said at the opening remarks 38 was too many, but I can't get to 1. If I could get to a half dozen, I'd feel more comfortable, and maybe this blended or hybrid model is one of those components. A non-credit is a second component, and that scale degree is a third component, because those models at scale are very different than what we do for class sizes of 20 individuals in the classroom, and how that learning takes place is also very different in terms of how we build it out.
Yeah, and I'll say we have a lot of face-to-face programs in our array, and they are sort of moving into a hybridized format. One advantage of having a fixed fee model with additional fees that we can add on is that we can simply say, well, if you need an online version of that program, we can expense that as a separate fixed fee, and that does give flexibility. Let me go back and just say, I will mention, we have one model for our degree array, but much like Nelson, we do have multiple models. We have a separate model for summer session, and we have a separate model for individual courses that we support that are state supported, since most of that goes through us. So we have a separate non-credit or non-degree model, both for face-to-face and online. So those are all run somewhat separately at our institution, but our degrees do run largely under the same base model, which is really, again, it was focused on face-to-face to begin with, and online was an add-on. So it really accommodates online and hybrid programs quite readily within that structure, because it really looks at whether a program is self-sustaining given the structure that it has for tuition. Most of our programs, I will add, are master's degrees, professional master's degree programs, and they have the ability to set their own tuition, especially if they're self-sustaining, so they can develop tuition around the fee structure and the student costs, so that we end up with a self-sustaining program, regardless of whether it's hybrid, online, or face-to-face.
Lisa, do you want to add anything for that one?
Sure, I'd be happy to. First, I want to go back to what Nelson was talking about, because I thought that was really important, about what we're doing in the online world impacting campus. And because we're building everything internally through OSU faculty, anything we build in our online courses, whether they be hybrid courses, fully online courses, we allow and encourage our faculty to use it in their site-based course. And I think that's been one of my biggest surprises, is how faculty in general, when they come through our training program, they often say, this is the first time anyone's taught me to teach. This is the first time I've had any support in instructional design. And what they're learning through our training programs, they're actually applying to their campus-based courses and tell us it's improving what they're doing on campus. So the impact that we're having is not just with our online students, with our campus-based students. And we feel strongly, if we're spending the resources to build something, to create, an animation or, a video or whatever we're doing with the faculty for the online course, use it in the hybrid course, use it in the site-based course. That's really, we encourage that. As far as the funding for hybrid, again, we're one model. Anything, and I'm just talking online credit. So like everybody else, when you're in the non-credit world, it's a different model. But in the online credit world, whether it be hybrid with a location at our Portland Center, or hybrid with a location anywhere in the state, or hybrid, I guess, any kind. It is the same model as our fully online. So again, 80% of the tuition is going back to the college. There's one exception, is campus-based faculty can develop hybrid courses on campus. And that's not through us, that's through our Center in Teaching and Learning. We coordinate, but it's not through us, so that does not get the model, which we feel good about, because those students are paying a different tuition, so it wouldn't match. So the hybrid, that's anywhere that the site-based piece is not in Corvallis, runs through our model. If the site-based piece is in Corvallis, it's a campus model.
Okay, we have another question from Penelope, who asked, do any of your institutions have restrictions on online revenue needed to be reinvested into online? Lisa mentioned a model that allowed unrestricted use of online revenue. Is that typical?
I'll jump in here first. I think we have there's a couple different things in this question. So one is the unrestricted use of online revenue, and I won't speak for Lisa, but our net revenue back to departments is unrestricted use for those departments. Now, they typically don't reinvest locally back in online. That's the central unit's use of that. So, so the money that goes back, that's net revenue above expenses to departments, is unrestricted for them to use and invest how they would like to, whether that's online or in other areas. The money we retain in our model is tied to our cost structures today. This is one of our challenges that we have with the model. It is very tight to our existing cost structure. It doesn't give much to invest forward in some spaces. And so this is one of the things that we're wrestling with in our model today, is online requires some constant care and feeding and reinvestment into our model. We are so inexpensive on campus, and that's a real benefit for our campus partners, but they'd also like to see us reinvest. And so there are not restrictions on net revenue for any additional revenue generated that goes back to campus. And then the small amount that we keep, we have to use to cover our existing costs and expenses within Continuum College. We do have other funding flows that do allow us to invest forward, but it doesn't come directly from degree revenues. So not sure if that's exactly the question that you're asking, but a couple parts there. One is how we fund online, and the other is what happens to the revenue.
Lisa Nelson, anything to add on this idea of restricted versus unrestricted use of revenue?
So I just echo Rovi's comment. When it goes to the individual faculty or the units for which they work, that typically is unrestricted, whereas the centralized units is for covering their costs and to find investment dollars to create new programs. And that's just an internal philosophy. It's not written down any place, but from the provost office and my desk as dean, that works well with the faculty. They know that we're investing in them, and that's part of our role across the institution.
And we're the same. The dollars that go back to the colleges are unrestricted. So we don't track how they're using that. That's up to the leadership of the college. The dollars that we get, we manage. They're like Nelson, there's no written policy, but there is the trust that we are investing the dollars wisely to advance online education for the university. And we have the purview to determine how that is.
Okay, John asked a question that I'm sure many people are wondering. Since all the panelists have mentioned bearing some of the risk to develop online programs and courses, which factors are used to decide what the market wants? Is it faculty interest in moving their own pedagogy to online? And the most important question, do you ever say no to developing a new program? Can you each talk a little bit about how you're making decisions about moving some of these things forward? And maybe that gets into a little bit of financial modeling or financial analysis. Rovi, it looks like you want to kick this off.
Sure, happy to jump in. We do have a market research team that looks at the viability of every program. That team, in part, is one way that we do sometimes have to say no to programs that are great ideas. Underwater basket weaving is going to be huge online when it comes online, but the market research and the evidence that we have today don't back that up. And so because we are a cost recovery part of the institution, we have to be able to look at that risk and make sure we are able to recover that cost so we can continue to fund additional programs into the future. Now, with 111 degrees, we have a very wide net in the way that we have been able to operate. But there is a measure here that says these programs do not get state support. They are not getting subsidies. They have to stand on their own with their own tuition. And because I do own the financial risk on these programs, we conduct market research, and we do in fact say no to programs that we know just are not going to have enough student involvement to be able to generate the revenue to sustain itself or to pay that back. That, by the way, is increasingly true even for state-based programs at many institutions. And I shouldn't say state-based, state-supported increasingly, as we are no longer state-based in many cases, but as we decline into the single digits or low double digits of support from the state, even our state-supported programs are having to really look at some pretty hard-nosed calculations about whether they have enough students to sustain themselves moving forward into the future. And there are parts of our institutions that we certainly want to maintain regardless of their financial sustainability. That's ultimately going to be a critical decision. But I will say my unit is one aspect of how our institution can develop degrees in a self-sustaining model. We have a different business model for state-supported programs. Right now, all of our online degree programs are self-sustaining. That's just been the evolution of how it has moved so far. I think there's a broader conversation that's starting at our institution about how we holistically support a breadth of programs because we know that there will be more coming online in the future, and it won't all be in the professional master's degree space. So to us, it's going to be an open question as we move forward, but we do say no. We have to say no on occasion, and I think that's true regardless of whether it's online or face-to-face. We're just having to look at each program and make sure that they're going to be viable financially going into the future.
We're similar to Rovi as far as being very heavily market research driven. So it goes both ways. We're doing market research on our own, looking and seeing what are the demands out there. We do a biannual statewide needs assessment of adult learners in Oregon who are open to online education. So we have a real good understanding in Oregon, what are our learners want. We also look at national data. So if we think something has a market potential, we'll bring that idea to the academic unit and say, hey, do you want to work with us? At the same time, we have colleges and departments who come to us with ideas. And again, not all of them are good. They think so. I've literally had faculty come to us and say, I know if we build this, there'll be thousands of students out there for this program. And we're not an at-scale program like Nelson, so we're not going to get thousands in it. So we have to kind of reel them in. And that's when we do market research. We work with some outside companies to help us with the market research. And then we have a small unit that's doing it. And we will collect the data, do a scan of who else is offering this. Can we differentiate ourselves in the market? If so, how does our cost compare? Because our tuition is already set. And so we look at a lot of factors before we determine if we're going to do it or if we're not. And if there is no market or we don't think we can compete or that program, that market is already saturated, we're not going to build because it's a huge expense on us and on the college to build something if there's not going to be enrollment. The exception is when there's a program that's almost done, and we find those sometimes. So someone will come to us and say, hey, if we build 3 more courses, we now have this degree because we've built so many courses. We have 1,300 online courses in our 50 online program. So that's always like, okay, well, we can build 3 more courses and then there's another degree option. So that's a low cost to us. And we do a lot of cluster marketing. So similar degrees are marketed together. So there's not a lot of added expense other than those individual courses. So that's really the only time. And I think there's been 1 or 2 times where we've done something maybe that didn't have a huge market, but the mission was so right to what we were trying to do and supported the university that we said, let's do it. We really want to offer this degree online. Again, it had some market, not maybe as big as we had wanted, but we felt like it was the right thing to do. And we have that prerogative then to build it.
So I'll be quick here because I know there's a lot of questions coming in. And so we too have a market research group. And so market drives a lot of what we do as a self-sufficient unit, as both Rovi and Lisa have said. But I'll add another thing in terms of the ability to say no, since we're taking the risk, and that's faculty availability. If I see a program come to me that has 2 faculty, the answer is no. Because you're going to build expectations out across the market space. And if something happens to those 2 faculty, or it's their retirement package or whatever, you got to be able to have continuity with the faculty to be able to make sure the program succeeds. And so that's another one of the factors that I put in place to the point where we now sign MOUs between ourselves and the internal department to make sure there's a continuity that the faculty want to do this beyond just the initial dance.
Okay, thanks to each of you. To remind our audience, we are limited in our time today. I promise we will not get to all of your questions. So we're going to get through as many as we can, but I will be putting up the slide with our panelists' contact information. If there's something you want to follow up on specifically, you can certainly do that. Our next question comes from our colleagues at Boise State. How are support service costs covered? For example, do you support positions in financial aid, a testing center, a graduate college, etc.? Who wants to start with that?
Yes, it's part of my cost structure at Georgia Tech.
Same here at the University of Washington. We provide positions in most of those departments listed there and a few others, including libraries.
We don't directly support all of those. With the 20% that's going back to Central, that's covering the cost. So I don't have staff in financial aid or staff in the registrar. The exception is advisors. I fund academic advisors for each of our degree program because we found that our students weren't getting what they needed on the campus-based advisors. And then we also, on certain projects, we'll invest in that we think are really going to be advantageous for our students. But we are not hiring individuals in each of our partner units. That 20% that the Central takes helps to support the staff there.
Okay. We have a question. How do you ensure you have enough faculty to teach the online courses that you develop? Is there a model you use to ensure that you have multiple faculty that can teach each online course that's created?
So perhaps that was directed at me since I brought up the faculty part of the risk point. And so when we look at syllabi of individual courses, that's part of the Georgia Tech syllabi is what faculty can teach that course. Any syllabi that only has 1 faculty member, I look as a red flag and I start asking questions. Well, who could teach that? Is it a required course, an elective course? And I use that for my basis of decision making. Talking to our faculty colleagues is another great source. Are they looking to do a hire in that particular position in the coming years? And that gives you insights about the sustainability of the particular program from a faculty position.
Okay, others who want to respond to ensuring we have enough faculty?
At Oregon State, that's the responsibility of the colleges. Unfortunately, we have no say. They determine who's going to develop the course with us and who's going to teach it. And, you know, it usually works, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we'll build something and the faculty will leave and then they don't have somebody else to replace it. So it can be a problem. Usually it works, but the academic units determine who's developing and teaching it, and we can't control any of that.
Very, very similar at University of Washington in terms of local control for teaching. We do set up expectations through a memorandum of understanding with the department at the very beginning that the department really does have to provide the academic core for teaching under a certain set of minimums. I think the question though is about growth, and so typically most departments for us today tend to set their growth expectations within what they can provide today. So we don't use a lot of scaling in our online programs. And this might be what the question is getting at. So most of our programs aren't designed to have 50 or 100 or 200 sections running where we're hiring dozens and dozens of adjuncts. They are typically smaller programs with a few sections that would be larger than perhaps a non-online program, but the faculty alignment is the same and the hiring is done pretty much in the same way. And then the program size tends to be based on the faculty capacity as much as it does anything else.
We have a couple related questions about who is determining both any kind of fee, if there's a distance ed fee, and also who is determining tuition costs on your campus and whether or not your organization is involved in that decision making. You might want to kick us off there. Lisa, is this one that you want to start with?
Sure, I was working on this yesterday. So the university is the decision maker on what our tuition and fee structure is, but they absolutely consult with us. So we can give our input. So when they're looking at, we're going to be raising tuition X%, you know, what do you think this will do to your organization, to your place in the market? And so we're constantly doing scans to see where our tuition compares to others. We're a quarter system, a quarter university for quarters. So we've got to transfer what that means to compare to our semester peers and compare. But we definitely give input and it's listened to generally, but it is not our decision. The university makes the determination when our tuition is going to go up. And as I mentioned to you earlier, our kind of revenue share model, when the fee was included, not included, that's all decided through our budgets office, Provost, with our consultation.
So this is Nelson at Georgia Tech. We certainly have a consultative role, but the university system controls all tuition, so it goes beyond just us at Georgia Tech as well, and that includes online. The other comment that I would make is we do not have a distance fee. We're trying to move away from fees, particularly from a financial aid perspective or an employer perspective. Many will not pay fees, but they will cover tuition, so we're trying to be as much tuition-centric as we can possibly be.
I think I mentioned earlier for University of Washington, graduate programs have the ability to set differential tuition, whether it's state-based or self-sustaining. And again, most of our online or all of our online right now in that area is self-sustaining. And so the tuition can be set largely by the unit. We work in consultation with them to build a budget. We look at what the students can afford, what the quote market can bear. As Nelson said, some of the programs that we develop are largely employer paid programs. And so we look at all of those factors when we set tuition, but we tend to set tuition with departments. Ultimately, it is a department call for graduate self-sustaining education. There are tiers and baselines if you move over to our state-supported side for graduate education, and undergraduate really has a unified tuition structure, and that is set a little bit in a different way, especially for state-supported. We have 2 self-sustaining undergraduate programs. Those to date have been allowed to set their own tuition tiers as long as they were below the state tuition level. I think going forward, that will be a conversation because unlike graduate programs, undergraduates want to transfer and move around. And if we have lots of different fee structures for undergraduate programs, that's going to eventually cause a problem for us. But we're not very heavy in that space. I think like Nelson, we do have for standalone online undergraduate courses, we have a fee structure for online versions that is not very popular with anybody on our campus, students, parents, but also even our administrative staff who have to deal with those folks. And so we are looking at ways that we can fold those fees in, but for state-supported tuition, it is far more regulated than it is at the graduate level. So I think for us, it's an early part of the conversation of how we begin to provide the supports necessary for undergraduate education. I do think, and I'll give just a little bit of commentary here, I do say on our campus, I think it's time in many ways to stop viewing online as different from face-to-face in terms of its expense structure and the necessary capital expenditures we should all be putting in to support online. I think those days are moving past where we think of online as the cheap cousin to face-to-face. And it's, when we look at what we invest in on our campuses, for just a fraction of that amount, we could completely, each of us could transform online education for our campus, but also for the globe. $120 million classroom building. Imagine that for just a moment being invested. This is an old mantra of mine, but imagine that for just a moment being invested in online education. So I'll get off my soapbox there. I think we have to do more to make those investments real. But right now, it is determined on a program by program basis for graduate, and then we have a more complex for undergraduate in terms of fee structure.
Okay, a couple quick questions here. And I think we kind of got to some of this, but just to clarify, does the Provost office receive any portion of the funding in any of the models used at each of these institutions? Can we get a quick yes or no, Lisa?
So yes, so I report to the Provost. So the 20% that goes centrally does go to the central budget. So the Provost does have access to that.
Okay, Rovi.
Yes, we have an overhead fee for online programs. It's 7.9%, but I'm also a vice provost. So the money that we charge as fees technically is also staying with the provost office. And so you look at an all-in structure of about 27 to 28% that includes the online fees, but also the overhead rate that gets charged for programs that are considered off campus for us.
Okay, Nelson.
So yes, and that's part of the difference in my models also, depending upon whether the program's at scale or a more traditional kind of model. But in both cases, the answer is yes.
We also have a question about what position title or kind of office on your campus is responsible for the tracking and billing of revenue for your online programs.
So this is Nelson. It's a combination for us between my office and the bursar registrar office for the central part of the university. They work very closely together since the credit enrollments come through that same activity to make sure that our books are matching.
Very similar to Nelson. I've got a senior director for administration that oversees a small finance unit in our office. And that person and that group works very closely with our vice provost for planning and budgeting, who maintains the overall books for the university.
We have business centers on this campus. So all colleges and units have a business center who's managing this, and that report to the budget office. So it's all connected from our business center to the budget office.
Okay, this may be our last question, and I have put up our panelists' contact information if you want to follow up. We had some questions coming in asking for specific contextualized advice for certain campuses, and I think that might necessitate maybe a more private conversation, and I welcome you to contact our panelists. Maybe our last question is, have you had any evidence on your campuses that online courses took away from the face-to-face business, or that the online course cannibalized the traditional campus-based courses for the same course? I think this is probably a concern for many folks as they're thinking about this. Nelson, you want to kick us off?
Yes, we've actually studied that, and we've seen the on-campus activity actually go up based upon launching online programs. So we've seen absolutely no cannibalization, but I would put a caveat out there as they tend to be different market segments. But the awareness that there's an online program gives awareness that there's a residential program, and the marketing aspects of just the degree exists or the program exists helps out both, at least in our instance. The online students tend to be older working individuals, whereas the residential students tend to be more traditional post collegiate experience prior to work, at least at Georgia Tech. But we've seen no cannibalization so far.
We've seen no cannibalization. We don't have too much that's in a head-to-head space where we would see direct competition, but part of that is the booming economy here is leading us to struggle with not bringing students in, but serving all the students in the Puget Sound region. And so all of our programs, whether face-to-face or online, continue to grow.
We also had a faculty department head do an analysis when they launched their online degree program, and they really tracked over years to see if there was cannibalization, and the results were there was not, that it was new growth. I do need to say, though, that we do have a significant portion of our campus-based students who are opting for online courses, and that number continues to grow. My rationale is if we didn't offer it online and they want online, then they'll go to some other online school. So I feel it's really important that we deliver our courses at Oregon State in a variety of delivery modes and let the student choose what he or she wants to take. So I don't really view that as cannibalization. I view that as options, and I'm hoping the university gets to that place as well, that we let each learner choose how he or she wants to take that class.
Okay, well, we are at time, and I want to thank all of our panelists again for being so open about what's going on your campuses, the challenges you're seeing, and the different models that you're using for these online programs. And also, I want to thank our audience members for such thoughtful questions and for your engagement today. Again, we are going to be offering a replay of this webinar. So if you found it helpful and want to share it with your colleagues and you are signed up for the series, you will be receiving an email that will come out in the next couple of days with that replay option. And all of the webinars in this series, we had 3 total, this is the final of the 3, are available on our website at ecampus.oregonstate.edu/bio, where you can find out more about the edited collection and view any of the replays that you might want. So a big round of applause for our panelists and for all of our thoughtful audience members. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. Have a wonderful rest of your week.